Hi everyone, really excited to be giving the talk to you guys today about how products like Biorender get developed and continue to be developed. So a quick agenda for today, I'll give a little spiel about what Biorender is for those of you who don't know. Then we'll dive into how products get created at Biorender, and then I'll touch a little bit on alternative careers that you can pursue in science communication if you're so interested. So Biorender is a science communication platform that helps scientists create and share beautiful professional scientific figures. The mission of Biorender is to empower the world to learn and communicate science faster through visuals. And right now we're known as the Adobe for science, but eventually we want to be the go-to place where all science is communicated. And actually, our journey started not too long ago in January of 2018 with a small team of 6. At the time, we only had 10 users and 50 illustrations created with the platform. As you can see, what we started off with was pretty minimal. You can add like a text box, a couple of little icons, and that was basically it. But today we've grown to over 70 team members, over 1 million users, and over 5 million illustrations created on our platform. I joined Biorender personally only earlier this year, but it's been really amazing to see how quickly the product and the user base is growing and how much our users love what they can do. At Biorender, the product development team is comprised of 3 key individuals. So first we have the product manager, which is my role. I'm responsible for guiding the success of the product by laying out a product vision and leading cross-functional teams through strategic decisions. We have the product designer who's responsible for designing the function of the product and advocating for a world-class user experience. And lastly, we have software engineers who are responsible for leading the technical strategy or how the product should be built and actually then building the product itself. Typically, there are 3 to 8 engineers for each product development team. And depending on the size and the maturity of the company, you may have other roles that are part of the team, but these are the 3 key individuals that almost any product development team should have. And we're also constantly interacting with many groups of people within the company and also outside. Most importantly, we're talking to users on a regular basis to understand how they're using Biorender and to discover new opportunities for us to help solve their problems. Our customer support and our sales teams are speaking to users on a daily basis, often more than we do. And they most often hear about problems that users encountered before the product team. So we make sure to get all of that good knowledge from them. We have an internal team of science designers and illustrators, many of whom are BMC alumni. They use our platform to create icons and templates for users. They often have great feedback on the product as well. And lastly, at an organization as big as Biorender, there are typically multiple product teams that are working on different aspects of the product, and it's important to keep in contact with everyone to make sure that the product itself is very cohesive. So how do products like Biorender go from a very rough idea to a fleshed out solution to something that people use and love? The first step to creating anything, to creating any great feature or product is to really understand what problem you're solving for people. Understand what people are trying to do and why is it so hard. This is really important, and I think about this every day because you can have the coolest and most innovative idea in the world, but if it's not providing a benefit to people, no one will really use it. At this stage, you start with a rough idea of what the problem might be. This idea can come from customers or what other teams are saying or trends in the market or something that you've observed yourself. But it's really important to have a comprehensive understanding of the problem before you even start thinking about like why we want, how we can solve it. In this diagram that I'm using here, this idea starts out really small and then the triangle gets pretty wide because you're starting off with a very shallow understanding of the problem, but then you end up with a lot of information. Here, the product designer and the product manager are spending most of their time doing user and competitor research. So we're directly interviewing users, conducting surveys, or doing analysis of other products in the space. We recently went through this stage at Biorender by looking into scientific posters. For those who aren't familiar, scientific posters are large printouts that scientists create and showcase at conferences to present their most recent projects and findings. So they usually look something like this. And the most common tool that scientists use is actually PowerPoint. So they'll create these like 4 feet by 6 feet posters using PowerPoint. And I've actually gone through this process myself. It's kind of crazy to think that PowerPoint can be used for something like this, but they do, and it's a really painful process. And this is what a conference hall looks like, with hundreds or even thousands of posters hung up. And we've heard many times from our users and team members that used to do research that creating a poster and presenting it at conferences is a really painful process. But in order to get more than anecdotal conversations and truly understand the problem inside out, we did research by sending out surveys to our users, asking them about their experience. And then we also conducted interviews where we had users show us exactly how they're using programs to create posters. So this particular user actually uses Adobe Illustrator to create the poster. So this is what a screenshot looks like. And then the product designer and myself then did competitor research by actually trying to recreate some of these posters using the common tools. The end result here is that we were able to clearly articulate each step of the process a scientist goes through, from the moment that they know about having to create a poster to the moment that they're taking it down at the end of the conference. For each step of the process, we know exactly what the user is thinking at that point and what problems and frustrations they run into. Now that you have a wealth of information on the entire user journey and experience, then we need to define a specific part of the problem that makes the most sense for the team to solve right now. Scientific posters is a really big problem. There are a lot of moving parts, but focus is really important, because let's say after I do all of my research, I'm able to group the entire user experience into 4 distinct subproblems. And to fully solve each problem and develop a solution that people love using, it needs to be both functional, reliable, usable, and delightful. And in most cases, when you're trying to solve a problem, you have business constraints like time and resources. Like, you don't have all the time and money in the world. And let's say for this project, you may only have enough time and resources to fill in 4 squares. If you're not focused, you might try to solve all 4 problems and you invest in making sure that you have something that taps into every single problem. It's really easy to think that if someone can do the job in your platform, they'll choose to do the job in the platform. But very often we see that users will abandon a product for a competitor or just choose not to use it because it's not that fun or not that delightful to use. So think about an app that you opened that you thought it was really great concept, but when you were trying to go through it, you just felt very frustrated and didn't love using it, and you abandoned the app completely. If people try a product and have a terrible experience the first time, it's a lot harder to get them to come back after you've spent more time making the product delightful. So you want to make sure that any solution you deliver ticks all 4 boxes. You'll definitely have people who try out your product after you release like the solution for problem 1 and find that, you know, they actually need something that solves all 4 problems for them to use it. But it's easier to get them to try out your product again after you solve problem 4, because they've acknowledged when they're trying out your app for the first time that they had a really great experience and they can trust that you can do the job right. In this part of the process, the product designer and the product manager are doing more user and competitor research to understand which area the team should focus on. And then they're taking their learnings and advocating to solve the problem that would improve user experience and deliver business results the most. And the engineers here are providing technical context, which will help the team make the decision better. So for example, it's really important to know, like, maybe problem 4 is super complex to solve, but we can probably solve problem 2 a lot easier. That will help us weigh the pros and cons of seeing which one we should go after. So going back to the scientific posters example, after we conducted all of our research, we listed out the 5 subproblems we thought that scientists had when creating posters. And then based on our conversations with the customers and the mission of the company and the potential effort involved in solving each of the subproblems, we decided that we would really focus on solving problem 1 first, release an initial version of the product, and then going to tackle the other problems. We actually went through this entire exercise 1 or 2 years ago with scientific posters. And at that time, our focus was a little too broad, and that ended up kind of snowballing into a really big project that was difficult to maintain, and we weren't able to release a delightful product. So this time we're focusing on being really, really focused and having a good user experience on this first problem. So once we decide which problem we should focus on, now we can get our creative juices flowing and explore all the different ways that we can solve this problem. So I'll use our recently released custom icon colors feature as an example. So this is what our icon color feature looked like before. So when a user selects an icon, they have this like palette of colors to choose from. But we heard a lot that this actually wasn't enough colors. Sometimes users wanted many different colors to illustrate their research, or they wanted a specific color to match their institution or company branding. So for example, Pfizer has a very specific shade of blue that maybe they want their cells to all look like. The design also wasn't friendly to users who had color vision deficiency. So imagine, how would I be able to tell this red and green apart with no verbal indication or word indication? And sometimes it's also frustrating to use because a big part of this pop-up covered your canvas. So if your icon was like underneath here, you wouldn't actually be able to see it. After doing initial research to understand why people were requesting additional colors, the designer started off solution ideation by looking at how other products allow users to choose different colors. So he actually went through, there were way more products than this, but for each specific product, he went through the entire user journey, took screenshots of like key user interactions, and you can see very detailed, here. He left pink stickies calling out things that caught his attention. And he did this for, I think, like 10 or 12 products. So very in-depth research. And then once we got an understanding of what other products are doing and what our users might expect, because they've already used those other products, the designer then started brainstorming what our solution could look like. So typically at this stage, these solution brainstorms look more like sketches, but this particular product designer is super talented and all his brainstorms look like actual designs. And here's the first solution that he came up with. It's very similar to our existing color picker. We have a set of presets that the user can choose from, but then in addition, they can choose a custom color for their icon. So this is very like Google Slides inspired. And we have another similar design, but just placed in the left-hand panel so that it doesn't cover the canvas. And then a little bit more complicated, we have a design where an icon might have 2 or 3 different colors that influence it. So for example, color 1 could be the cytoplasm, color 2 could be the nucleus, and this gives users the chance to choose the color for each one. At the same time, our developers were exploring different ways that users can change the color of an icon. So they were focused on technical functionality here. So you can see that their version, their design of the feature doesn't look that great, but they have a bunch of features here. They have contrast, brightness, blur, even sepia, the ability to add a drop shadow and maybe even change the hue. Sometimes design ideation and technical ideation can happen at the same time. And what's so amazing about that is that this actually gave the designer more insight into what's technically possible. And after seeing this from the developers, we were able to go even further in our designs and give users even more ability to adjust their color. So now we have this icon split into different layers. So here we have the lid and the beaker, and then we added even more features such as adjusting the transparency, the saturation, or adding a glow to the icon. So now that you have a big variety of different solutions that you can pursue, the next step is to narrow it down to one that's the best way to solve our users' problems. At this stage, we're either creating prototypes and having something that we can show users as quickly as possible to get feedback. These prototypes can be static designs, or an actual early stage product that users can test out themselves. The latter usually requires more time and effort, but there are a lot of programs out there now like Figma that lets designers create prototypes without engineering help, and that's been really helpful. I'll use another example of a feature we released recently called connector lines to showcase this. So this feature allows users to anchor the ends of a line to objects. And then when you move that shape or that icon, the line will readjust with it. This is pretty common in tools like Miro, Google Slides has it, and I think Lucidchart is really popular for this as well. It's really helpful for when people want to create pathways or flowcharts. So you imagine like a signaling pathway, you have a million arrows going around. You don't want to have to readjust the arrows every single time you move a protein. This feature had a lot of very specific user interaction details that we really wanted to validate from users. For example, if you had a line that was connected to two shapes, as a user, would you expect that you could be able to just move that line by itself, or do you have to move the shapes that it was connected to move that line? We had our own ideas about how the product should work, but we wanted to put this in front of users and get their thoughts. So in this case, we didn't have a working prototype to show them yet. So we just walked through a bunch of scenarios. And this is a screenshot from a summary doc that I had put together. We interviewed users and we walked them through a bunch of different scenarios. So imagine you had two boxes with a line connecting them together. And then you ended up moving the line so that it's like a little bit to the right now. And we asked them what they would expect to happen. Very surprisingly, a lot of the times people say things that you never even thought of before, which is why user interviews are so important. But we saw here that people had a variety of different expectations. Some would just expect the line to be completely detached from the shape. Some expected this part of the line to be still attached to this box. And one user that we interviewed thought that she wouldn't even be able to do this. And based on this, we were able to develop the product in the way that we thought was best from the user interviews. And actually in the app, if you go in right now, we went in the direction where if you had a line connected to two objects and you moved the line away, it would just disconnect from those two objects. Once we know that our solution does help solve users' problem, now we actually need to get the solution into users' hands. At this stage, the product designer is really getting into the nitty-gritty details. All the designs need to be high fidelity with exact specifications. So here, this is a screenshot of what our color picker feature looked like when we sent it to the developers. You can see it's like very granular. With like actual pixel details. There's like specific hex color codes for every single thing. And we also provide these to engineers with criteria such as if I was a user and this was open, if I clicked anywhere outside of this box, oops, this dialog would close. We're also providing high fidelity designs for the different states that the app can be in. So what it looks like when you hover over something and what it looks like when you actively select it. But you can't really account for everything in the designs, which is why collaboration throughout the development process between designers and engineers is really important. So this is a screenshot of a message that one of the engineers sent to the product designer about changing something in the design, because once he implemented it, he saw that the space was actually too small. And he came up with a solution that said, let's just have this little icon and have the message in the tooltip, which we ended up going with. And vice versa, you can't assume that everything will make it into the product exactly like how it looks in the designs. Sometimes there are small design discrepancies like, oh, please shift this box over like 2 pixels because it doesn't look right. or once we start testing the product, we discover edge cases that we didn't think about before. So that's why we often do quality assurance tests to make sure that the end product looks and behaves the way that we want. So here's an example of the product designer doing a QA, and he discovered that if you put in something other than a hex code in this field, it's obviously invalid. But the error message that we give looks kind of wacky because we hadn't thought that someone would put not a hex code in this field. So he quickly designed a proper looking error message, and we implemented it before we released the product. And it's also important to test the feature with users before releasing it widely. So for example, this is what it looks like in our app to select a color for a shape. So this is blue right now, but if I clicked this green box, the box would turn green. And then if I clicked away, the box would continue to turn green. In the custom colors feature, we added this cancel and apply button. And this was the only major difference between these two color pickers. We thought it was pretty innocent. Actually, we didn't even notice that this was that big of a change. But when we started testing it with users, we actually found that people were not expecting these buttons at all. And actually, they didn't even notice it. So when we told them to change this to green, they would click the green button and then click out to close the box. And then the icon would turn back to red. And this went on for a lot of different people, and they were getting really confused why their icon was not staying green until we pointed out this apply button here, and then they got it. But this signaled to us that this was not very intuitive. So we changed the behavior now that even when you select a color and don't click apply, you click away, your icon would still stay the color that you chose. So it's really important to test it with a small group of people before releasing it widely to everyone. And once you've released something to users, you can start the cycle all over again. You can be getting feedback from users to see if you need to continue solving for the other subproblems. Sometimes you release a solution for problem 1, and then you realize, you know what, problems 2 to 4 aren't that important and people can get by. Or you learn that, oh, actually subproblems 2 to 4 are pretty important and we should continue working on that. This framework is called the double diamond design thinking framework. It's pretty self-explanatory why it's called double diamond if you guys want to look into it more. But there are a lot of other frameworks as well out there that go through the product development process. I just really liked how this was laid out. And in the best case scenario, you start looking into an opportunity area and you end up going through the entire product development cycle. And then you can continue that all over again with something else or continue solving for that specific problem. But a lot of times you learn about a problem and the more you learn about it, the more you realize, you know what, that doesn't really align with what our platform or our business wants to do right now. So you move on to something else, or you learn about something and decide it's not the right time for the product to solve that problem right now, but maybe in a couple of months or in a year, the time is ripe again and you go through the process all over again. And lastly, sometimes it's a problem that you can solve quickly, it's small, and other times it's a really big, hairy problem where it takes a lot longer for you to actually deliver something of value to users. Here's my little disclaimer here that I already mentioned. And I want to quickly touch on the alternative careers in science communication. Some of you may have already heard this from Shiz in a couple of previous talks that she's done. But there are a lot of transferable skills that science illustrators have, such as critical thinking, having a creative eye, having multidisciplinary strengths, being detail-oriented, and having strong media production skills. And all of these transfer really well to a lot of other jobs in the science communication or tech space. So I touched on the product designer and the product manager role here, but there are roles such as user experience researcher who really does a lot of research into the user experience, pretty self-explanatory role. Especially if you're talking to scientists and things like that, and you have that background, it's very easy to empathize with them and have a conversation. And there are also roles such as product education managers. So a lot of companies such as Biorender, even Adobe, things like that, have specific people who make sure that they produce content so that users can learn the product. Don't take it from me. This is from Leslie Preddy, who is a BMC alumni. She's now the lead product designer at Zendesk. And she says here that the skill of breaking down complex problems or information into understandable bits transfers well from biomedical communications to product design. And Jerry, who is also a BMC alumni, is now the scientific creative lead at Biorender. And he's great. I love working with him. And he says that the most helpful skill that I felt the BMC program provided was an aptitude to effectively discuss science, regardless of topic, my understanding, or the conversation partner. And we're also hiring at Biorender. So if this talk piqued your interest and you want to learn more about these roles, we have a lot of Science Illustrator positions opening up early next year. And we're also looking for a user experience researcher, a product designer, and many more roles. So you can check that out on our career page if you're interested. Cool. Thanks for learning. Thanks for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Polly. That was a great presentation, and it's super interesting to hear about how a product gets developed, how different members of the team work together. It's very, very neat. So thank you for that. If anybody has any questions for Polly, feel free to use the raise hand feature or write your question into the chat. We'll just pause here for a few moments to see if there are any questions. I actually have a question. It's not super big or super exciting, but the product designers at Biorender, they use Sketch. Was that, those screenshots were from Sketch, right?
Yeah, so they use Sketch, and then when they send the designs, because Sketch is not a cloud-based platform, you have to download it. So then they use Zeppelin to share the designs with developers.
Right, cool.
But we are thinking about moving to Figma. That is a big thing in design nowadays.
Sure is. We just had a BMC class about Figma prior to this talk.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, if, oh, we have a question from Contessa, or two questions really quick. We'll take these two. So Contessa asks, is there another framework that you or Biorender uses besides the double diamond?
That's a great question. Honestly, not really. And we don't really use the double diamond framework itself, in the sense that, like, when we start a project, we're not like sketching out a diamond and saying like, okay, we're starting here, now we're going here. It's more of like a way that you're thinking about the process as you're going through. And what I like about the double diamond framework is it encapsulates both the need to like go big, go wide, and really understand and explore your options, and then focus in. So I think the most frameworks always highlight the importance of like understanding the user and doing things as small increments. I can't remember any off the top of my head what they're called, but I think all frameworks have that like same idea.